Story 1. I'm no longer alone in the facility. Working at the storage facility was always peaceful, but mundane, a regular 9 to 5 with occasional customer interactions, paperwork, and keeping an eye on the camera. But everything changed after we were struck by a streak of break-ins. My boss asked if I would be okay holding down the fort during the lonely, dark graveyard shift, a precaution to deter the thieves, I suppose. She and another worker would take the day shifts, and I would take the nights. Just for a week, she said. Pay and a half was a good incentivization, so I took it. The shifts went by without a hitch. I mostly watched the monitors, chugged coffee, and played on my phone. Before my last shift on the last night, I was sent to Home Depot with the company card and asked to fetch new bolt cutters since ours were done. They were old, rusted, and dull. It was then that I met a creepy man. He was there in the aisle, doing the same, looking for bolt cutters. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see him looking at me. He was just staring at me, and it was uncomfortably creepy. Finally, he asked about the storage facility that I worked at. As I looked over, he was pointing at the company shirt that I was wearing. "Yeah," I said. "Just picking up some bolt cutters. The ones we have are old." He nodded his head and continued with questions. "What time do I usually work? How many people work there? What hours are we typically open?" They were weird questions, and uncomfortable to say the least. Not wanting to answer any more questions, I finally picked out a pair of cutters. "Well, have a good one," I said. "You too," the creepy man said. As I turned to walk down the aisle, I felt like his eyes were on me the entire time. I paid and left, brushing off the exchange as just a weird encounter with a creepy man. Returning to the storage facility, I settled in for a long night. As the night progressed a few hours, a thunderstorm rolled in, the winds were picking up, and the rain was coming in heavily. As I was sitting behind the desk, looking out at the rain, I noticed movement on one of the cameras. There was a tall, skinny person that had just hopped the fence onto the grounds of the facility. The person looked to be a man. He was hooded and dressed in dark clothing. It looked like he was carrying something too. I inched closer to the monitor, trying to get a better look. As I strained to look, it dawned on me what he was carrying. Bolt cutters. The man looked around, and then started making his way to one of the units. I started to reach for my phone, but couldn't take my eyes off of the monitor. He was swinging the bolt cutters around to his other hand, when out of nowhere, he looked up and directly into the camera. My heart, by now pounding uncontrollably, dropped into my stomach. He was wearing a mask. It covered his nose and his mouth, obscuring his identity. But his eyes were visible, and it was as if they were staring directly into mine through the monitor. By this time, I should have already been on the phone with the police, but I was absolutely frozen. Then, his head slowly looked down as if he was looking at something in the distance. As I watched, my heart dropped even further when I realized that he was looking in the direction of the office. The very office that I was sitting in, watching all of this unfold. Slowly he dropped the bolt cutters to the ground, never taking his eyes off of the office. I was shaking, and it was almost like I was in a trance. There was a voice in my head yelling, "Call 911, call 911," but I couldn't hear it because I was locked onto the monitor. The man slowly set the cutters down, and then began to walk slowly over towards my office. As he did so, he placed one of his hands inside a pocket. Just as he walked out of frame, he began pulling his hand back out. I was able to pick him up on another camera though, but this time I was viewing his backside as he was slowly approaching the office, which was in frame too. As he pulled his hand out, I could barely make out something that almost made me pass out. It looked like he was pulling out a knife. Just then, there was a huge crack of thunder, and then, as if things couldn't get any worse for me, the electricity went out. It was pitch black now, and there was a guy walking towards the office I was in with what I believed to be a knife. If any good came out of the electricity going out though, when the monitor shut off, it was as if I was jolted out of my trance. I threw myself under the desk and finally called 911. "There's someone here and I think they have a knife," I said to the operator in a panic. "I need the police here now." As I was speaking with the operator, the unthinkable happened. I began to hear jiggling from the door handle at the back of the office, the one located on the facility side of the entrance gate. I began shaking uncontrollably. "I need someone here now," I said in a panic. The operator tried to comfort me. "We've got officers on the way." Because I was under the desk, I couldn't see anything except the wall behind it and the floor beneath me. But I could hear everything, and the man's determination to get into the office was escalating. Then, out of nowhere, the jiggling stopped. Any relief that I would have had was short-lived, though. After a brief pause, there was a huge bang. I wish it was thunder, but unfortunately it wasn't. The man was now trying to kick in the door. My eyes watered up with tears. "Please," I begged the operator. Another bang, this time more violent. At that moment, I felt like the next kick would burst open the door. I closed my eyes and braced myself for the final blow, the one that was going to leave nothing between the intruder and me. The tears were now pouring from my eyes, and I could barely control my breathing. I waited, for what felt like an eternity, for the final blow to come, and for the door to burst open. 5 seconds went by, then 10, then 15, but the final blow never came. After what felt like at least a minute, I slowly opened my eyes. They revealed red and blue lights flickering off the wall behind the desk. The cops had arrived. I crawled out from under the desk. There were 2 cop cars. The one in front was pointing its spotlight towards me in the office. I rushed out of the office towards them. 2 more cars arrived. I detailed what happened. Because the electricity was still out, I couldn't raise the gate. So all of the cops took off on foot except for one who stayed back with me. After a thorough search, they found nothing. No intruder, no bolt cutters, nothing. The man had made his way out, leaving nothing but a few dents in the back door of the office. An investigation took place, but in my opinion, it seemed to be low priority. Nothing was ever stolen, the intruder never made entry into the office, and nobody was hurt. I even told them about the creepy man at Home Depot. I'm not sure they ever followed up on him. They did some extra patrols for a few nights, but after about a week or so, those stopped, and it was like nothing ever happened. Questions still haunt me. Who was this person, and why were they trying to get into the office? Why didn't they just try to steal something from a unit and then leave? Who was the creepy man at Home Depot, and did he have anything to do with this? Amongst these questions, there is one thing I do know for certain. I will never work another graveyard shift ever again. Story 2. The Girl at the Door. I never thought an overnight shift at a fast food restaurant could turn into the most horrifying night of my life. My manager, Daryl, approached me one day with his usual nonchalant demeanor, asking me to work an overnight cleaning shift in preparation for a visit from some high-level executives the following morning. Despite the short notice and unusual hours, from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., I agreed, recognizing the urgency in his request. The night started typically. As soon as the lobby closed at 10 p.m., I began my work, scouring every inch of the restaurant to ensure it was pristine for the upcoming visit. The drive-thru crew worked busily, providing a subtle background noise that broke the eerie silence typical of late-night shifts. After their departure around 1 a.m., the restaurant fell into a silence that, for some reason, heightened my alertness. It wasn't until 1:30 a.m. when an unexpected timid knock at the lobby door jolted my attention. There, through the glass, stood a young girl, no older than 20, her eyes pooling with a mix of desperation and urgency. She gestured toward her phone, and then made a talking motion with her hand, signaling she needed to make a call. My instincts, typically inclined towards assistance, nudged me to help her. The battery on my phone died. "Can I use yours to make a call?" she asked through the glass door. It was strict policy that we were to never unlock the door or let anyone in after hours. This included family and friends, and it definitely included complete strangers. She looked so innocent, though, and my heartstrings pulled to help her out. Yet something felt unsettlingly off about the situation. My hand hovered over the door lock, hesitation now building. But just as I made the decision to go ahead and unlock it, I noticed a subtle movement in the dimly lit periphery of the parking lot. My heart pounded loudly in my ears as I leaned slightly, trying to get a better view of the shadow lurking just around the corner of the building. "Hey," she said. "Are you going to open the door?" Her pleas, though seemingly genuine, concealed an undercurrent of urgency that didn't quite align with her initial mild demeanor. I hesitated more. "Open the door now," she snapped at me. Her face had now completely changed. The distressed damsel she'd presented just moments before was now gone, and what stood on the other side of the window seemed annoyed and frustrated. I shook my head slightly, gesturing that I would use my phone to call someone for her. "I'll call the cops for you," I said. "They can come and help you." She now appeared to be fuming. Nevertheless, I went to retrieve my phone. When I returned, she was gone. Nowhere to be found. I looked all around the periphery of the restaurant. There was no one. The remaining half hour until my shift ended was nothing but fear, paranoia, and second-guessing. When my shift ended, I darted to my car as fast as I could. I never saw the girl again. Looking back now, the whole situation makes my hair stand on end. I was just a hesitation away from unlocking that door. Then what? Who was in the dark corner of the parking lot? What was their intent? Thankfully, I'll be able to ponder over those questions. Had I opened that door, though, it might be a different story. Story 3. The Light in Mrs. Jackson's Room. This is one of the craziest stories you'll ever hear. It happened to me about 11 years ago. It was around 1:30 a.m. and I was making my way down the hall of a nursing home. I was a maintenance man and was doing some work in the kitchen. I needed to get it done overnight so that the kitchen would be available for regular operation during the day. Anyways, I was walking down a hall back to the kitchen after retrieving some tools from my truck. As I passed one of the rooms, its light suddenly flicked on. I paused, stepped back a bit, and peered inside. When I looked inside, a couple of things felt off. An old woman was sitting quietly in a chair, staring at the wall. It was peculiar because the room was nearly empty. It only really had the chair that she was sitting in, a bed, and not much else. The second thing that felt weird is that as old and fragile as the woman looked, it was odd to me that she was able to flick on the light and get in the chair so quickly. I noticed too that her bed was completely made, not a wrinkle on it. Rather than knocking on the door or saying anything to the old woman, I felt like it wasn't my place. I was a maintenance man there to do a job and not be concerned with the affairs of the residents. Instead, I continued walking down the hall and notified a staff member. The staff member and I looked back down the hall together, only to see that the room was dark again. At this point, confusion was really starting to set in. "The fifth door on the right," I said to the staff member. "Mrs. Jackson's room?" she asked. I looked at her and said that I had no idea because I had no idea who Mrs. Jackson was. We walked down to the room together and the staff member flicked on the lights. There was nobody there. The room was completely empty. "Are you sure it was this room?" the staff member asked. "Yes," I said. "There was an old woman sitting in that chair and she was just staring at that wall and the lights were on." Finally, the staff member looked at me and said, "This is Mrs. Jackson's room. She died 2 days ago." I literally felt my blood run cold. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Yes," she said. We both just stood there and looked at each other. It was like both of us were trying to process what each of us was saying to each other. Finally, I didn't know what else to do or say, so I just said that I was going to finish up in the kitchen, and we both went our separate ways. I finished up and got out of there before the kitchen crew made their way in the next morning. About 4 months later, I ran into that staff member at a Walmart. "You know," she said, "after you went back to the kitchen, I checked the security cameras." My eyes got really wide. "You were right. You walked past that door and the lights came on. After you walked away, they went back off." I was in shock. I knew I wasn't seeing things. "It didn't show anything in the room, but from the view of the hallway, it definitely shows that the lights came on and then went off," she said. "I think we were both already freaked out, so I didn't say anything to you about it that night. To this day, I can't explain what happened, but I know what I saw. There was an old woman in that chair, and according to the staff member, that old woman was no longer alive." Thanks for tuning in to another episode from the Alley of Nightmares. If you enjoyed the video, please like it, subscribe, and share with all your friends. Until next time,